Hey class, today we are learning about hash tables. This is the first video of a multi-part series on hash tables. In this video, we will explore some motivation behind using hash tables and describe what a hash table is. This video assumes that you are already familiar with arrays and big O notation. Now let's get started. It's Christmas and Grandma needs your help. She has many grandchildren, each with a specific gift request for Christmas. Grandma is finding this a bit overwhelming and needs some help keeping track of what each grandchild wants. Luckily for her, her friend Ida has an idea. Ida comes over and suggests to Grandma, "Have you tried using arrays? Arrays have O of 1 lookup." This sounds pretty enticing to Grandma, so she says, "No, but I'll give it a shot." Then Ida says, "No need, I'll do it for you." That night, Ida goes home and fixes up an array for Grandma. The next day, Ida brings Grandma a present, an array of ordered pairs telling Grandma which grandchild wants what. Grandma takes this array and is pretty excited at first. Then she starts to wonder, what does Jade want for Christmas? Unfortunately for Grandma, Grandma cannot see all the contents of the array at once, so she must iterate through the array until she finds Jade. This might be okay for 5 grandchildren, but what if Grandma had 100 grandchildren? 1,000 grandchildren? We can see that this can get pretty inefficient. Here we see a source of confusion between Ida and Grandma. While an array does have O of 1 lookup by index, lookup for a specific grandchild is O of n, scaling with the array size or number of grandchildren. That night, Grandma has a terrible nightmare. She dreams of how inefficient this data structure is and thinks to herself, O of n lookup? Oh no, I'll never make it in time for Christmas. Suddenly in her dream, Santa appears, and he says, "Use a hash table. Ho, ho, ho." And just as soon as he appeared, he vanished. Now Grandma is left wondering, what's a hash table? Well, fear not, Grandma, because CS Professor of Fun is here to explain what a hash table is and save Christmas. First, I'll give a brief overview of what a hash table is. A hash table is a data structure that stores key value pairs. For example, in the pair Jade-Mittens, Jade is the key and Mittens is the value, representing that Jade wants mittens for Christmas. A hash table is an array of buckets. A bucket is just a fancy name for a slot in the array. It takes the key value pair and passes the key into the hash function to calculate the hash value. This process is sometimes called hashing. Then it uses the hash value to insert the key value pair into the bucket with the corresponding index. Lookup is accomplished with a similar process. I know this is a lot of information at once, so let's break it down even further with a visual representation. We start off with our key value pair and our hash table, which we initialize as an array with a fixed size. Then we pass our key into our hash function to generate an index I. We then insert our key value pair into the bucket with index I, like so. Now, if we want to do lookup, it's a very similar process. We first hash the key to get the hash value. Then we look at the bucket with the corresponding index and see which value corresponds to our key. Let's see what this looks like with an example hash function using our Christmas present example. We'll use the length of the key, which is the grandchild's name, as our hash function. First, we have Ryan Yo-Yo. Ryan has 4 letters, so we insert Ryan Yo-Yo into the bucket with index 4. Now let's try another grandchild. Let's try inserting Sarah Puppy. Uh-oh, Sarah has 5 letters, but our buckets only go until index 4. Looks like we have to make some changes to our hash function. Here, I've slightly modified our hash function to modulo the length of the name by the number of buckets in the hash table. This ensures that no matter how long the name is, the hash function will always return a valid index for the hash table. Let's try hashing Sarah again. This time, we get that the hash value is 0, so we insert Sarah Puppy into the bucket with index 0. Now, I want you to give it a try. Can you insert the pairs Isabel Coat and Serena Lollipop into the hash table? Feel free to pause the video to try this out for yourself. Here are the answers. Isabel has 8 letters, which means it hashes to 3, so the pair Isabel Coat goes in bucket 3. Serena has 6 letters, which means it hashes to 1, so the pair Serena Lollipop goes in bucket 1. Now I'll give you a brief demonstration of lookup. Say we're interested in finding out, what does Sarah want? We hash Sarah and get a hash value of 0. Then we just check the bucket with index 0, and we can see that Sarah wants a puppy. So you can see that so far, lookup is very similar to insertion, with the only difference being that you don't insert. Before we continue, let's do a brief runtime comparison between lookup in an array and lookup in a hash table for a particular key. In the array, we must iterate through the array until we find the specified key, which has O of n time complexity. So, lookup for a particular key in an array is O of n. In the hash table, we first use the hash function to calculate the hash value. This is O of 1, assuming we have a good hash function. Then, we index the corresponding bucket of the hash table. Since there is an array underlying our hash table, the time complexity of the step is simply the time it takes to index an array, which is O of 1. So, lookup for a particular key in a hash table is O of 1, assuming a good hash function. But what do I mean by a good hash function? There are many properties that make a good hash function, and I will describe just a few of them here. I'll also show examples of bad hash functions. Valid indices. A hash function must return a valid index, or else there's no way to insert into the hash table. This is why we modulo by the size of the hash table, to ensure that the range of our hash values matches the range of possible indices. So, a hash function that returns -1 times the length of the key is not a good hash function, because our array can't have negative indices. Similarly, a hash function that returns a decimal is also not a good hash function, because the array indices must be integers. Deterministic. A hash function must always return the same hash value for the same key. Otherwise, if we insert something and then look it up later, we might not be able to find it. So, a hash function that returns a random number between 0 and 10 is not a good hash function. Efficient. In order to be more efficient than an array, a good hash function must be fast. Otherwise, an inefficient hash function can actually be slower than using an array. So, a hash function that waits 5 hours before doing anything is not a good hash function. Uniform. A good hash function should distribute key-value pairs relatively evenly across the hash table. So, a hash function that always returns 1 is not a good hash function. Why?
Collision!
A collision occurs when different keys hash to the same hash value. Let's see one in action. If you were paying attention, you might have noticed that we started out with 5 grandchildren, but we only inserted 4 into the hash table. So, what happened to Jade? Let's try inserting the key-value pair Jade Mittens into our hash table. Jade hashes to 4, so we insert Jade Mittens into the bucket with index 4. But wait, Ryan Yo-Yo is already there.
Collision!
How do we resolve this? Can Jade and Ryan both get Christmas presents from Grandma? Or will Jade be the only grandchild left out? To be continued. In our next video, we will look at some ways we can resolve collisions. But for now, let's summarize what we've learned today. We learned that a hash table is an array of buckets that stores key-value pairs. The hash function uses the key to calculate the hash value, and the key-value pair is then stored in the bucket with the index corresponding to the hash value. We learned that hash tables have O of 1 lookup, provided we have a good hash function. We learned that a good hash function returns valid indices, is deterministic, is efficient, and distributes the key-value pairs relatively evenly across the hash table. We learned that a collision occurs when different keys hash to the same hash value. Thank you so much for watching, and please, feel free to comment any questions you have about the video or any topics you would like to see me cover next. I also welcome feedback for how I can improve my videos. As always, this is your CS Professor of Fun.